Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome our wonderful panel. First up, we have Peter Morgan, creator of The Crown, Suzanne Mackie, executive producer, Ben Caron, director, and Vanessa Kirby. Thank you all for being here. Thank you guys for sparing your time to come here and chat with us this evening. We are going to open out to the audience at the end. So if you have got questions, get your hands up sharpish. Don't be shy, because I hate to do that thing where you ask for a question and no one puts their hand up, and then you say, last question, everyone's hand goes up. Don't waste your time. Once Peter's sorted everyone out with drinks.
Actually, vodka.
Listen, thank you so much. And first of all, I think we should start by saying congratulations as well, because this is a world that we love and we've all kind of grown up with and stuff. But to have the opportunity to have it dramatised by you guys has been a huge success. Peter, I'd like to go back to the start, please. What made you want to tell these stories?
Hello. I'm still slightly embarrassed to be writing about these people, and to find myself still doing this. And I yearn to write a heist movie.
There must be an element of heist at some point involved in The Crown and the.
I dream of an all-male cast with guns and violence and no words and profanity but instead I write these slightly uptight sentences with everybody being cruel to one another and
you undersell
but it's sounding
yourself.
quite polite. And it started when I was doing the play The Audience, and which was a series of audiences between the Queen and different prime ministers, and the one between the Queen and Churchill felt like it had more mileage in it. There was this, and I thought, well, we don't think of her as a young woman, and he was at the end of his political career, and she was at the very beginning of her reign, and I thought, wow, that's there was something lovely in the grandfather-granddaughter paradigm. And then I started thinking about all her prime ministers. And I think I should say that I would never want to write about the royal family. I don't think of myself as writing about the royal family. I think of myself as writing about Buckingham Palace and Downing Street. Mm-hmm. And yes, I think it tips more towards Buckingham Palace, because I think we gravitate towards her more. She's the constant. And so when we're writing stuff and editing stuff, she's the centre of gravity that we keep going back to. So that's why there seems to be more about her. But I couldn't do it without Downing Street and without the tent pole, as it were, that is the relationship between her and whichever prime minister it happens to be. And that I hadn't exhausted myself in that interest and that passion. And so I started doing that with Churchill, and then I suddenly thought, well, where do you start this story? Do you start it with her already as Queen, going to her first audience with him, or wait a minute, but then her father has to die and she has to become Queen? And then, oh my God, his death was quite interesting because no one had expected it. And then at what point? And then he must have known. And did you know that he was operated on in Buckingham Palace? And, it started like that. And then I thought, well, it'll only be one season. And then it just does get more and more interesting. Rather than, people always say, have you had enough? And part of me has. But it actually does also get more and more interesting the closer you look and the longer you give it. And the truth is, if I gave it the same time again, I'd still find lots of stories to tell.
I read someone say, it was a great line, true stories are the best teachers, which I really liked. And I think that because this is this family that God knows everything has happened to them and happens to them, forms the backbone of this wonderful thing that you've created. It's a dramatisation. You're not a documentarian. This is, you're this is...
Well, I think they link us. They connect all of us. And I say this. I don't think of myself in any shape or form as an expert on them, or indeed on the Constitution, or indeed on the 20th century, second half of the 20th century. But I do think there's something really interesting and profound about the way all of our lives are interconnected with theirs in some shape or form. They are at some level the thing that unites all of us, whether it's our grandparents, our parents, our children. We've all, she's been there as a constant for everyone, and this family has been there. But particularly her face, that face, whatever you may feel about them, about monarchy, about everything, we've lived with. Well, not just everyone in the world, but particularly the 53 countries of the Commonwealth. We've lived with this very special relationship with this extraordinary woman. And whatever you may feel about it, unknowable, very knowable, ridiculous system, should it be got away with? Should it, does it have greater currency now than ever with the failing of so much of political life? It never stops binding us all together. And one of the things that's been quite interesting to watch is how different generations have connected with the show. I thought I could narrow down very specifically. To be honest with you, this is crass, but I thought this would appeal largely to educated, mainly female, over 40. That's what I thought, partly because of the connection with, I thought it'd be degree educated, over 40, female. That's what I assumed. And it's complete, all the feedback and the research suggests it's completely different. And I think that speaks to the unconscious current that her face, her presence has in all our lives.
Suzanne, you're kind of like the glue between all of this in terms of as an exec producer on The Crown. I imagine you are one of the busiest people in the entire production.
I am, yes. I mean, I am. I am, and and it's a fantastic privilege to be in that place, to be perfectly honest. And I think, Peter said right at the very beginning that the scale and the demands of the Crown, it really means that one has to lead a very monogamous life professionally, and I couldn't agree more. And in a way, I think, as he's pledged to do that, I am too. I think that's right. I think great work that Peter is producing deserves great support, and that's the only way, that you stand together and you really work together as a team, and you're there. You roll your sleeves up and you get in, and you surround yourself with huge talent, and that's the directors, and obviously the writing and the actors, and you support that and you make it happen. Absolutely.
And in terms of just going back to that scene that we saw in the editing, and that's one other great craft within The Crown as well. It's the editing, and there's as I say, so much going on within that one scene, which could have quite easily have just been that banquet dinner scene, but then it's intercut with all these other
perfect sort of marriage of the political and the personal. Both are profound in that moment, and both are significant elements of that particular episode. And I think it was a brilliant moment of bringing those two. In many ways, they sort of embody the Crown, if you like. But that was a moment where I think we knew something was missing from that episode, and that's when we all banded together and said, we need to go back out and we need to do some more. And those decisions aren't taken lightly; they're taken heavily.
Yeah.
It started on the Queen, actually, where we did the first cut of the Queen, the film with Helen Mirren. We finished it in 2005, and we looked at it and we showed it to the producers, and they said, "Look, it's okay, but it isn't quite an Oscar performance for Helen, and we need." The way we'll market this is to really let Helen have a showpiece, and so they said, will you is there anything extra you'd like to do? And so I craftily wrote, because Stephen Frears and I both thought, well, the Queen isn't going to start throwing china against the wall. Mr. Blair, I have an Oscar-winning speech to give at this moment.
Catch my saucer.
I say she doesn't really say anything, you know. So we'd spent 4 or 5 days shooting extra scenes of Tony Blair, and that's where I learnt this, you know, the benefits of reshoots, and sort of once you write a script, and then you shoot the script, and then horribly it turns out to be something completely different. And you then have to adjust to the fact that it's become something else. It's no longer the script. No matter how faithfully you've shot it, it is embarked on its own new life, and you have to adjust to that. You have to adjust to that accordingly. And so one of the things I said on The Crown was that, you know, one of the things I insisted upon was that we get reshoot time with every episode. That every episode gets a chance to completely and utterly examine it in a different way. And so that leads me into this whole business of cinematic television and where we are now. And I honestly, just the process that Ben was describing, I don't think anything we do on The Crown is different from the way in which I made Frost Nixon or The Last King of Scotland or The Queen or whatever. That it's the same level of rigour and the same layer after layer after layer. And those, you know, like Suzanne was saying about, you know, you don't fluke on it first time, you know, writing it. You write terribly first, and then you do another pass and it's like a little better, and you keep doing coats of paint in the hope that the paint... And a wall that's been painted 15 times just looks better than a wall that's been painted once. And that's the difficult thing, is to try and do that in this new era where television is no longer television. It's become this different thing. And we all have different expectations and hopes for it. You know, and so reshooting, which I don't think you get the privilege to do on many television budgets, is something that, you know, is one of the main advantages of having a bit more money, is to be able to factor that into our production schedule. It's
the most wonderful kind of depth into people and relationships. That's kind of when you strip it all back and you take everything away. That's what it's about, I think. And Vanessa, I really hope there's a Margaret spin-off just with you, because I could just watch you for hours and hours, and it's just wonderful to see. This character, kind of just go to every corner really, and bounce back again as she had. What's been the biggest challenge for you in bringing that character to life, and what have you enjoyed the most?
Try not to over-egg it all the time. Peter at the very beginning went, just do less. Whatever you do, just do less, and then do less again, and then do less again. I think the biggest challenge, probably, especially to begin with in the first season, was because we were filming it often out of sequence. So we did it in blocks, but sometimes I think we started with the very first scene Claire and I did was a scene in episode 10 in Scotland, because that's what we had the location. It was summer, wasn't it, or something? So it was better to shoot then. And Claire and I were so terrified. It was like the windiest day ever on record in Scotland. We had these headscarves on; they were blowing everywhere, and the scones were going everywhere. And I think Claire and I had to ADR the entire thing because we were both speaking like this because we were so nervous. I think it was like really making sure that I totally understood her journey from the 17-year-old at the wedding, right the way through until the end of season 2 when she's 34? Something, I don't know. I remember going into my first audition with Philip Martin. I had all these books, and I was like, because of course she starts off at 17, and I don't think they quite clocked that. And then they looked at my face, they were like, oh. And I was like, oh, fuck, I've just lost the part. But I was like, but then she's 21, like scene 2, so, you know, like skips the time. So it was charting that really and making sure that, you know, every time I said, I'm to somebody, they were asking, I've heard you're playing Margaret. God, she was awful. God, she was such a battle axe. God, she's a nightmare. And I was like, I understand her reputation, and there's something amazing about that. And I think a lot of what people tend to like about her is that she's so kind of unapologetically herself and very rude. And but it was the finding the girl behind that who then became that person, and kind of charting the truth of pain that comes with that, and that makes you hard and it makes you hostile or look down on people or you know, build a million walls between you, and really showing the vulnerability so it was that really setting that up and making sure that I didn't preempt, because I would have loved, as Peter knows, to play the absolute dragon. I was like dying to play her later on. But I had to kind of hold back on that and try and work out that journey, and then playing it out of sequence. I just meant, long-winded answer.
It's a very good answer. But getting the opportunity as an actor to play a character, the same character over a number of years, it's not an opportunity you get that often. So a wonderful toy to play with.
But the best. That's what I loved so much about knowing that I could do it for 2 seasons and like grow up with somebody and try and really, because by the time it came to season 2, I felt like I knew her, you know, and that was amazing. You don't get that. Even when you do a play, you get time, but you get the same amount of time. So to have that, and if it was a film, she'd be in the background drunk, smoking, so, you know, like for 30 seconds, you know. So it was an amazing gift to be able to play somebody for
She gets her moments. That's another clever thing about it, is the tone. There are these wonderful comedic moments that kind of pop up, and this light and shade that is continually throughout. Is that an easy thing to do?
I think it's just part of being English, isn't it? I mean, it's just sort of British. It's just so naturally part of who we are and how we are and the way we go about things. And I'm always struck, you know, I spend a lot of my time going to Vienna, and they don't. I mean, no, it's just not in the same way.
Still go.
You know, no, I mean, I just think we deal, you know, it's just what we do. We deal with so much of being, you know, so much of our being serious is done through comedy, and there's so much, it's so valued here. You know, it's almost the highest compliment you can give anyone is he's got a good sense of he's a fascist, but he's funny. You know, so
naming no names.
I think you couldn't. It wouldn't be as quintessentially British as this if it didn't.
And was that a way of almost humanising these characters as well? Because, you know, I think, you know, as I keep referring to them, you know, as the royals and stuff, and obviously, you know, they're the backdrop of this story. What's fact and fiction, you know, it's whatever. But I don't think we really think about them as being funny people, or, you know, being in situations where they're cracking gags and stuff. And so I see that as a real human trait, really, and so by introducing that.
Although I think that Prince Philip, you know, frequently people oversimplify him by only focusing on his humour, and actually, an extremely complex and interesting man is reduced by being always thought of as a bloke who makes unfortunate remarks here or there or whatever. And actually, one of the great pleasures of the show has been to explore how interesting he is. And I remember at the time of his retirement recently, where it was announced that he wasn't doing any more public engagements, I was sort of horrified by how uninteresting most of the profile pieces were about him, and I thought, you know, I mean, you know, whatever one may think about, you know, somewhat a brusque manner sometimes, right? Or certainly very changeable, like the weather today. You know, you don't know what you're going to get with him. His background and what he's been through, it's absolutely breathtaking. And I certainly think about the second season, you know, some of the episodes where we explore his childhood and explore, you know, and we're going to carry on doing that in the seasons as they evolve. There are, you know, it's sort of some of my favourite stuff to write. I get very excited whenever I think about writing Prince Philip, and hopefully putting a bit more meat on the bone of what we all know and about him.
And just how he's been brought to life by Matt Smith's portrayal of him as well. I mean, it's just that the casting in it is just incredible and stuff. Susanna, can you talk us a little bit about, you know, these first 2 seasons and casting it and these what have become iconic roles now and performances?
Yes, Nina Gold is so brilliant and clever, and often offers up slightly counterintuitive suggestions, which are always smart and always coming from the right place. And I think finding Claire and Matt and New were just wonderful. I mean, we all knew it when we saw it. I think you went on an interesting journey, actually, because we had someone else in mind, and met. My fault. Sorry. No, I'd seen Vanessa at the National Theatre, and I thought she was extraordinary. But we had New in mind for someone else.
That's my nickname, by the way.
Smaller, Vanessa. Sorry, New to those that love her. And we saw her audition for this smaller part, a nice part, but a small part comparatively. And then
do you remember I don't know if you've seen
episode 4
the
of season
who got
1.
Venetia.
Who gets killed.
Who gets hit in the fog. That was, you were originally...
And we watched her and we were like, why are we giving her one time? I mean, God almighty, she's fantastic. So, but no, the casting generally is and Lithgow was a very clever suggestion of Nina's, as was Jared Harris. And the minute we saw Jared playing the king and that first cough, and everything that cough symbolised so much, and it felt sort of visceral and big and bold, and then Peter wrote the word cunt in the first scene, and it was like, oh yes, this is going to be interesting.
Jared actually went and got ill as well. He went and he said he went on the tube and licked his seats. So I was like, that's really unfair, because I was like, everyone's going to think you're really good at fake coughing. It's actually real, so I need to spread that.
Yeah, no, it was a good cough. That was the Oscar of coughing.
Do you remember Moustache Gate? So we had to reshoot something, and then so we said, well, we'll need Jared Harris back, and he said, yes, I'll come back. I just think you need to know I have a moustache. And we said, but the king doesn't have a moustache. He went, but I have a moustache. And so he was filming another movie at the time, so we rang the director. He's an incredibly famous director. His name escapes me for a minute, but he's a super famous director. And we rang him up. We said, would it be possible to have Jared Harris? I mean, the emails that went back and forth over this, and we desperately need Jared Harris. Oh, yes, we'd very much like to help. But he has this moustache, and the director said, can he shave it off? We hate the moustache. And we said, well, who's going to tell him? Are you going to tell him or we're going to tell him? We said, no one wants the moustache, Jared. And Jared said, I want the moustache. It was madness, pages of emails.
That's right. Oh. We kept it. We framed it, the little moustache that finally came off.
Didn't you send him a bottle of whiskey and a shaving kit?
Yeah.
When it comes to those relationships, though, with those characters who play alongside each other, and the chemistry between them is absolutely electric. Did you do a lot of kind of chemistry testing once you'd cast people, or before you'd finally cast people?
Matt and Claire, we did. Matt and Claire, it was really instantly obvious, and I had been. I'm ashamed to admit I'd probably been. I needed persuading about Matt Smith. And then I saw him with Claire, and it was just
astonishing.
Instant their chemistry, separate completely. And a friend of mine said, "I don't fancy Prince Philip, and I don't fancy Matt Smith, but I really fancy Matt Smith as Prince Philip." and there was something in his movement, and something it was slightly transformative, and that was really fantastic.
I love the relationship that you and Matt have on screen as well, because they're almost like kindred spirits in a way. They're kind of going through really sort of similar things in the background, in the shadows, who feel like they deserve their moment and stuff as well. Is that fun to play with Matt on that?
Yeah, we always wanted more scenes. I think we kept asking Peter, can we just have a scene together? And then we did.
Unlike any other actor ever. I feel I need an enormous...
Just give me less to do.
Camera going in slow. For an hour. Who are these other people?
We just have the Margaret episode.
Yeah.
The Margaret and Philip episode.
Well, anyway, it worked. She gave us one. And it was at the end of season 1, and we're commiserating about how annoying the Queen's being. And it says she adjusts his tie, and I couldn't do it in a non-sexual way for some reason. And Philip Martin, I kept sort of, it was too intimate, and I kept giving this weird lingering look, and it was meant to be just like a brother-in-law friendshipy type thing. And Philip Martin kept me like, "You're rewriting history. You need to not." So there was a kindred spirit there for sure. Maybe in another realm, those guys would have had a hoot. Somewhere.
I confess to falling in love with Pip, and it started at a read-through. We did an early read-through, and I think he came in. I can't remember which part he came in for, but it's his particular. It's an anthropological thing. I mean, when Pip spoke, I felt transported back to Edwardian Britain. And I don't know how he conducts his life in 2018 as an Edwardian Briton, but that's pretty Pip. I just wanted to write for him. I mean, I believe the part of Tommy Lascelles grew. Because every time I sort of thought to myself, well, particularly when you're trying to do the story of a young woman trying to find her way, and her father's gone, so who is going to be telling, and maybe the part of the Queen Mother suffered slightly because I gave her this all, through Winston and through Tommy. But I figured that there would be a softness to the Queen Mum, and her relationship with the Queen was famously very positive. And actually, Tommy was scary. His attitude to the Crown, particularly having been private secretary to, who had her uncle, who became the Duke of Windsor. And never ever to let that lack of discipline creep in again. And I thought, well, he's he's as close to a baddie as we can get.
So protective of the Crown.
That's as close as I got to the heist movie. It's
Tommy with a machine gun.
Yeah.
but then, what I loved about the decision in episode 206, so episode 6 of season 2, was to then give just a tiny glimpse into possibly why, with the Marlborough Papers and the revelation about the Duke of Windsor's very, very unsavoury associations with the Nazi Party and Hitler, and to know that Tommy Lascelles actually knew it and channeled it and felt it deeply, and actually, Pip. I'm talking to Pip about that, and that the responsibility of then playing the man that had all that in him. There's so much complexity beyond.
He served 4 monarchs as well, so he was a really useful. He was a fantastic character to have. George V, Edward VIII, George VI, and the Queen. I loved writing for him. He loved doing it.
Yeah,
and we all loved
He asked for
filming.
loads of extra scenes. By the way. He kept being like, when Lascelles retires, well, I read that he bumped into Margaret with a wheelbarrow. I think we should put that one in. I was like, yeah, let's definitely put that one in.
I like when you saw him with his toy soldiers, and kind of, it just tells you a lot about the character, really.
It's about his emotional maturity.
Still playing with soldiers. From the off, the scale and the ambition of this was huge, and it kind of had to be to live up to this world, really, in terms of how it was shot, but where you shot and how you replicated or showed all those, their world, really, and stuff. Was that I imagine that was quite a tough thing to decide where, and how you covered that.
Yeah, there was a very critical moment right at the beginning, actually, when as we started filming, or rather as we were in sort of heavy prep, when we were, the ambition was to shoot as much as possible at Elstree, and we'd taken over 2 studios there and had built. And I think it was Philip Martin who was the first director, wasn't he, on the first block, saying we're going to need higher ceilings, we're going to need greater depth. And we all thought, God, this can only mean one thing, which is we're going to have to go out on location and find houses that give you that scale. And it was absolutely the right decision. And I remember Andy Harris and myself and Andrew Eaton, we all sat back knowing, in that really serious sort of white knuckle moment of panic where the budget is we've got to keep control here. And yet it was such a compelling argument. And there is no doubt when you look at some of those scenes in season 1 and 2 where the rooms are big and majestic and authentic, and a painting in the background is vast, and you have Claire, the Queen, sitting in front of it, small and lonely and on her own, and suddenly that's giving you that's enforcing the narrative, that's really enriching what Peter's trying to do, which is that it's nuanced and psychological and big, and then it's about people, and that you realise that it was a great decision.
And then he writes about the Britannia.
Yeah.
And then the trip to Tonga and
which we did in Chiswick or something. We didn't go to Tonga. We didn't get a boat.
But was strangely actually said that the speech that you saw Vanessa give earlier was in Woking.
It was meant to be Rhodesia, and Matt and Claire went to South Africa, and I was like, they're going to fly me out any minute because I know we're going to need an exterior of Margaret waving at the crown. And of course, then I was in Woking, freezing cold in the end. Never got past Woking.
And we shot some of the North Pole in Tring.
And it's almost that kind of idea of an actor as well, walking into a scene on one set, the main crux of the scene is in another set, and then they exit from another. It's
and tantalisingly, the Britannia is up there. It's in Edinburgh. Sorry, it's in Edinburgh.
Yeah, just up the road.
I went and spent a tragic day walking around it.
Why tragic?
Well, no, just being just like a royal train watcher, and there it is. It's so tantalisingly close, it's.
We photo mapped the Britannia and then used that to sort of do some of the big visual effects shots.
Wow. And then we've got one of the islands, the beach.
This is all in South Africa. I think a lot of this was mainly shot sort of down near Cape Town and along that coast to Hermanus.
The attention to detail is very important. The authenticity.
And the heads of department we've got. Again, this goes back to this business of this slightly new era that we're in at the moment. I mean, the thing that we are able to offer people is that we are London-based, which is so nice. So people, if they have families or whatever, they can work on the show and stay at home instead of being, sent to different parts of the world, and you can have a stability, and I think that's one of the ways we're able to keep doing it, and we've got fantastic heads of department, the art director and the production managers, and they've all come back and they're all staying with us.
And most of the editors, Pierre. I mean, people have stayed with us. Feels like we've become a bit of a family. I know that sounds sentimental or romantic to say it, but I mean that's one of the things I've found most rewarding about The Crown is that we've gathered together and we've stayed together, and you're working with people that are just extraordinarily talented and committed, and can create things like the Britannia out of just extraordinary attention to detail, as you say.
Because I don't know, there's no way any of us are going to plead hardship, but none of the rumours of our budget were true. I mean, none of the rumours, and it was sort of rather painful not being able to sort of say it. But we don't have anything like we have a perfectly healthy budget, but nothing. I mean, there are many television shows that have larger budgets, but for some reason we got tagged with something because I think people because we did a deal for 2 seasons or whatever, people thought that's what we were getting per season.
Because it looks so good.
Well, that's because people work. I promise
people work around the clock.
People work around the clock.
Yeah.
One of the things we as actors in the press, we always got asked about budget and how it felt to be on such a big budget thing, and it was a really weird question, because from being inside it, the only thing that I noticed that was different to other jobs was that people were allowed to do their creative best to the best of their ability, and they were enabled to do that. And that included us. So talking about locations, being in those houses and actually going around to those houses, eventually you kind of become immune to the scale of them, and then it starts feeling like it's your natural habitat of the character. Do you know what I mean? Well, that sounds not me. But like,
Bring me my
it's my house. No, but you don't, and in a way, like a bit like if you were to build a massive spaceship in Star Wars or something, and that became the sci-fi element. It was such an alien world to everybody that, except Major David, who was the consultant on the whole thing, that it became like part of of experiencing how it would have felt like. So it didn't feel phony, and it didn't feel like, oh, we're just using this costume that 10 other productions have already used. It meant that Michelle, the costume designer, and Jane this season could look at 5 different fabrics, and we could lay them all out and be like, oh, I think this is Margaret, that's definitely not. And then have that process that was a really creative process, as opposed to we're wearing this because it's super expensive and, you know, like, will sell well. It was never about that. It was like making sure that, you know, the art directors were incredible, so that you walked into Margaret's room and it was just like everything was perfect. So it allowed me to imagine better, if that made sense. And that helped all of us, as opposed to didn't feel pretend as much. It took a while to find Tony, actually, didn't it? We read with lots of different people, and the line that kept coming, we kept thinking that Margaret kept eating them for breakfast, so to speak, because like as a person, I think she's quite a force in a way, just as a person, and so we had to find somebody that could like make her feel intimidated, and that was quite hard. And Matt could, and so we just had such a nice time, didn't we? We really wanted to. They had to be matches for each other. They had to push each other in ways that no one had ever done before. And I think for the first time in her life, Margaret really feels like a fish out of water, because even with Peter Townsend, she was still the one in charge, and suddenly she's got somebody that's looking through her. And it's incredibly sexy, but it's also very vulnerability inducing. But yeah, we just laughed non-stop, really. Didn't we? Didn't we?
A little bit. Took a bit seriously, but yeah, a little laugh.
In terms of bringing it up to, you know, that era as well, it felt like there was a real kind of switch in it as well, in terms of how things looked and what parts of culture were being represented and things as well. Was that important to try and reflect that?
Yeah, so that was 1959, I think, wasn't it, something like that. So we were slowly easing our way into the 60s, and we were all very aware that we didn't want to sort of smack people around the head with the sort of swinging 60s, and that particular location was extraordinary. And Martin Childs, a wonderful designer, did an exceptional job. I mean, one of the, you know, we sort of looked at influences for you know, how could we not borrow, but sort of homage to and blow up. That Antonio film was sort of one of those films from that period where, you know, could we find a little bit of that might slightly seep into The Crown. I mean, that particular scene, I don't know if you remember, Peter, but we were sort of talking a few days before, and I'd said that Tony apparently used to keep his subjects waiting for up to an hour. You know, it wouldn't be fun if we did that. And
I didn't write that stuff about him upstairs and down. No, and it's just fantastic. It's just fantastic.
And almost it's uncomfortably long as well.
Well,
it's kind of. It's just
that went through a lot of.
Yeah, well, on the day I think we took most of the morning, and at lunchtime, I remember the producer going, "We're going to shoot the script today." Like,
they were banging around.
We might get to that, but are you watching this? How extraordinary this was, and then we got into the edit, and actually for about pretty much until the last week, we had tried about 30 different music tracks over that piece, and it was actually Peter, you know, in the final week, he said, "Have we tried it without music?" And it was one of those moments where we all, Jan, the editor, and I, sort of looked at each other and felt like, yes, that's exactly what it should be. And I remember listening to Lord Snowdon on Desert Island Discs, and he said how much he hated music, and it was really difficult for him to choose music for Desert Island Discs, and so actually that made so much sense, just leaving them in silence as he sort of slowly strips away the trappings of the princess and puts slightly off kilter. So yeah, that's it was many different incarnations with various different sort of poppy 60s musics that we were trying
Do you know
to...
that house is actually where they filmed Dragon's Den?
It is, yeah. The very
And
first
just goes to show
Dragon's
how
Den,
amazing the designers are to transform it.
Make
I
it
kept being
actually look good.
Where's Deborah Meaden? Coming out the
I
lift.
wanted to live there. I happily lived there.
Having worked on this right from the very, very beginning, that Peter knew that at some point in season 2 we would have to inevitably discuss the Kennedys, or JFK. And actually the more interesting story was Jacqueline and her interaction with the Queen. And the minute he said that to us as a small little editorial team that meets almost every day with Peter, that was it. That was right. That was the right decision. It's always come at it tangentially, come at it at a different angle, come back to the Queen, tell that story rather than the maybe more obvious one, because then you're just depicting, in a...
Well, I thought she was just turning 40 at that point, and she'd had 3 children. Or she wasn't quite 40, but nearly 40, and she had 3 children, and Jackie Kennedy was on this spectacular world tour, and I just thought, God, actually those first feelings of, just as she's beginning to become a little bit more thick-ankled and a little stouter, and that hair is becoming a little bit more of a sort of a helmet rather than a hairdo, that actually to have Jackie Kennedy sitting opposite you, speaking French and being fantastique, and I suddenly thought, ooh, that would be, So that felt to me like the subject of the whole was actually Elizabeth feeling frumpy.
Yeah, inferior.
Yeah,
And the 2 most powerful women in the world meeting each other.
Yeah. I remember watching that episode on a plane, and when the bit where Elizabeth hears what Jackie said about her, I said it really louder than I should. I was like, "Bitch!" The person next to me
That's a
actually
great
nudged
scene.
me.
Yeah, Claire's reaction.
Punk
that
it.
was the clue
Yeah.
when I heard that Jackie had said to her sister that she'd been fairly unimpressed by Buckingham Palace. And I suddenly thought, of course, because she comes from the White House, which is, there are not many people that aren't dumbfounded when they go to Buckingham Palace, and she would be one person with her, quite sophisticated woman. Yeah.
So here we go. It's a whole new series you're about to start and embark on.
Yeah. Well, 2 really.
2, yeah.
We're doing them back to back. I mean, I'm writing them all at the moment.
And a whole new cast.
Mm-hmm.
What can you do?
You mean, sorry to see Claire go.
Everyone.
No.
Everyone.
And Pip.
And Vanessa.
I said no.
Oh, yeah.
I said no. Yeah.
Mainly Pip.
But mainly Pip.
What can you tell us? What can you say about this, the 3rd season?
Well, the 3rd season, I can tell you that it starts in 1964, and that it ends in 1976, and that I've written some of the episodes, and that I'm in the process of wanting to shoot myself, and it feels like a big mountain. We've got Olivia, which is fantastic, and now we're just embarking on the process of casting, and it's sort of
socialist government for the Queen, so it's interesting times.
Yeah.
Have
I not given
Ben?
much? Yeah.
Well, I mean,
What can you say?
Nothing at
Nothing?
all, really.
Okay.
It's Harold Wilson. It's his tenure.
It's hard to recast, but you have to.
Vanessa, don't cry.
Once you make, but the funny conversations actually have been. I mean, once we got our head around the fact that we were having to say goodbye to these wonderful people, and I really mean that, because of course you work with each other for 2 years, and you thoroughly get to know each other, and but once you've made that commitment, and there was a moment where I was saying things like, "But Peter, hang on, what if it's like the Archbishop of Canterbury? He's already 70. We can't just cast an actor who's 80. I mean, that's mad." But you have to sort of, it's all or nothing. You have to, everyone has to change. So yeah, so even actors in their 90s will suddenly be 94, but a different actor.
Wow. Right then, my job is done. Who would like to ask some questions? Here we go. We've got a lady there. Have you got 2 mics or just the one? But yeah, if we can get a microphone there and then one over there as well. I think you're going to have the microphone first, sir. So if you might hold in 1 second, and I'm just going to go there first. Hello.
Thanks very much. Very interesting to hear all about the show. Peter, if I could ask you a question, I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about your writing process.
Sure. I mean, it's probably about a year, maybe a little bit more per season of writing time, and the first thing that I do is map it all out. And so the mapping out of the season, particularly now that people are watching, anecdotally, some of the information you get from Netflix is that the average amount of binge per human being is sort of 2.6 hours or something. I'm making that up, but we have people from Netflix here. Rajiv, what is the average amount? Where is Rajiv?
On the spot.
Hi, Rajiv.
What's the average? About 2.5.
Yeah.
Spot on.
So actually, you sort of, I do. It does then make you look at a season and the way in which a season might flow in a slightly different way. You no longer have the imperative to drive towards commercial breaks. You no longer have the imperative to end on cliffhangers. You're not trying to hold an audience for the whole week. And it gives you the opportunity to play with couplets, triplets. We have no particular time frame, so an episode can run long. I try and discourage that. There are some shows which run a 90-minute episode followed by a 50-minute episode. I don't like that. I think people still like a regularity. I'm speaking for myself. And so I am constantly thinking about the ingredients, like, when you're, and the focus on the whole season is really the bit I enjoy the most. It's the bit where I'm left completely alone. I mean, not alone, but because I'm always with researchers and I'm always with the script team. But it's the bit where I have the show and I don't have the production. And it's just lovely to be a writer, not a showrunner. And I will map out that for the first 10 episodes. And generally speaking, to overgeneralize, I will, if we have to get 10, I will eventually come down to about 12 episodes, all of which I think are indispensable. And then the business of losing 2 or, so that will be agony for a bit. And then finally I'll have the shape of the season, which I think also has to reflect what you're talking about the tonal variety. And offer the scope. You can suddenly feel, oh my God, that would be a really pretty indigestible and quite painful episode. So you're following that with something, because people, you don't need as many subplots, because people, if they're watching 2 or 3 episodes, they're going to be juggling an aggregate 12 subplots if you're doing 2 or 3 per episode, So you are thinking, I'm finding I'm thinking differently to the way I would have done in a pre-Netflix, a pre-streaming age. And then the rest of the time, I just, in terms of the writing, I storyline each episode to about 15 pages. I was with Michael Haneke over the weekend, and he said that for a 2-hour film, he writes a 30-page or 35 or maximum 40-page script. And I'm trying with these coming seasons to shorten them. These scripts were all about 50, 55, maybe even 60 pages. And I think they were sometimes too busy, and I think that they were sometimes, they had too much going on. They were too indigestible. And I'd like to strip them down, pare them down to about 40, 45-page scripts to allow time to breathe and to allow time for Ben to do the sort of thing that Ben was doing, to add some of that. It shouldn't all just be yada, 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 yada.
A research series.
Sorry, I just want to say one thing about being an actor involved in Peter's process is it's incredible to have a 10-hour thing written by one person, every single word, and that Pete would come on set and give me new lines all the night before because of some new idea he'd had, as well as watching the rushes, being on top of that, and writing the season 2 as we were filming season 1. It's like, this is a genius, like a pure genius. He hates it when I say that. But it's true. It's like a really. It's like
Still wants to get back in season 3.
So that flashback, that spin-off we were talking about, Eden.
Say a researcher, you've mapped out the entire season. A researcher comes with a revelation. One at a time comes to you with a piece of information, going, "I've just discovered this about a person, within." Has that changed the flow or been?
No, all the time, and that process is ongoing. So where often. And this is where fact and fiction, the good news about these characters is that for the most part, we do know where they are most of the time. It's a matter of public record where they are. The dots, just because of the court circulars or the matter of historic records or letters or whatever it is, where they were on which day and what they were doing on what day. And my job is to sort of join those dots. And if the dots are close enough together, then, the imaginative exercise. Obviously, I think it's a contract there is definitely a covenant of expectation between the viewer and me that they want me to make stuff up. I don't think they want, is it substantiated here? We have to make some sort of leaps of the imagination about how people were feeling. Did she really feel that way about Jackie Kennedy? I don't know, but I think it's reasonable to assume she might have done. Yeah. And maybe sometimes I get it wrong, because they aren't friends of mine. I don't ring them up and say, "Did you feel this way about that one?" And I want to keep my distance from them. So they're entitled to their privacy and to their objectivity and to their deniability. So it's tricky, all that.
The other thing I'd say about your process which is really interesting, having worked with many writers over the years, is that Peter involves you as producer or the script editors or the research team on almost as he's writing it, he involves you, and that for a producer, I find that immensely rewarding, because you're involved, you're invested in. A lot of writers will just take the idea, once the script has been mapped out and the beat sheet's there, and they go off and they disappear, and you go, okay, I'll see you in a month, or I'll see you in 6 weeks, or sometimes 8 months. But with Peter, you're in all the way. He involved you, and that creative process is immensely rewarding. You're rewarded back every single day, and that's probably not just once a day. That's probably 4 times a day, and that isn't because Peter's needy. It's because it's a really interesting process, and it means he exposes himself on the page and says, "Is this working, guys? What do you think?" And you go, "Jesus Christ, I've just been knocked sideways by that scene." And that's frequent. Or you know what? I don't believe that, Peter. I don't believe that. And we push back at him. But that, for a creative team, I cannot tell you how rewarding that is.
Thank you. Hello. What's your question?
My question's for Vanessa. So Margaret has a lot of incredible outfits throughout the 2 seasons. How many of her outfits were handmade and how many were originally vintage? And do you have a favourite?
Most of them were handmade, actually, and it was an incredible process for me, because I'm not particularly stylish and I never had a relationship to clothes other than picking them out of my drawer, the bottom and the back of it, as Peter, you always comment on. What is that? So it taught me a lot, and actually it was an amazing, again, part of the gift of this job, which was Margaret would have had endless fittings, and sometimes we'd have 4 or 5 for one dress or something. And we'd look at a picture of her. And Michelle Clapton, who was on the first season, was amazing at looking at something and going, okay, this is her. Now can we find what her internal life is and try and use the costume to express that? And it taught me a whole new thing about costume. For me, costume will never, ever be now just a representation of this period, or something that's, it's from 1950, so I should wear it. It's always got to be reflective of what somebody feels unconsciously or otherwise of putting that piece of material on them, particularly if they're someone who cares, or maybe someone who doesn't, and that always comes into it. So with Margaret, we'd find things like in a scene where you see her kiss Peter Townsend, she comes down the stairs and she's got this amazing sort of like strapless, flowing pink thing. And Michelle said we read that Margaret used to walk down the corridor and like swish to check that it swished properly, and so we wanted to make sure that when she came down that she was going to do something really bold and romantic, and she thought was incredibly a big, profound moment in her life. And so we always tried to take the costume and reflect those things. And in season 2, when she's kind of like messing up the whole room, we spent ages, didn't we, Ben, finding the right robe. Because all the robes were super colourful, usual Margaret things. I was like, she's not in the mood to even select one that's vibrant and that's upbeat in any way. So we were really specific. One of my favourite costumes in the end was, I think, that one you saw in the photography scene when she goes upstairs and she's wearing this little lace thing, and it's like a new kind of Margaret. And Jane was who's costume designer in the second season, was bringing all these new costumes, and I was like, no, I think it has to be like she's going to Tony's house deliberately. Like Margaret never does anything by mistake, and she's going with an intention of not seducing him, but she wants him to like her somehow. She didn't know why, but there's this energy between them. And so I wanted something that was revealing, but not too much or gratuitous in any way. And so we found this little lace material and we started building it, and then we tried some trousers on. We thought, no, maybe she's going to put on a skirt because she wants to look appealing to him, but not, give a suggestion of sensuality without ever being, gratuitous or sort of like obvious. And that was, I remember saying, God, this is like half the episode she lives in this costume. So I really wanted to find something that felt like it was reflective of how she was feeling about herself. And it's the first time in season 2 anyway that she has started to come out and feel like herself again, or started to feel like she was coming out the shell that she'd gone back in. And the first half of season 2 we chose things that were quite mute, quite dull, for her anyway, because she wasn't feeling herself, and she's didn't want to express that.
Do you have a favourite?
Oh, that's the one you're talking about.
That was an original. That was a vintage one. That was a vintage coat. Yeah. It's so good, isn't it? I know. I think Jane found it somewhere. I have to ask her where. And I went, I'm happy to have that.
I don't know how many dresses you had made. I know on season 2, Jane had, I think, 120 dresses made for Elizabeth. So much so when we were sort of shooting, and we're 2 units actually at the same time, I think she had her own van taking basically just the Queen's clothes around the country. Because it was too confusing that she would be on sort of 2 sets in the same day. So she had her own dedicated costume truck that would take
everything everywhere.
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, all
so
handmade.
what's really cool about them is about the gift of having Margaret and Elizabeth is that Margaret would never do it, would never wear anything Elizabeth would, and we established that really early on. I think there was one time when in episode 9 when they're with the horses, and Claire and I looked at each other and I was like, you've got my scarf on and I've got yours on, and we were horrified. And Claire was like, give me that dull brown one. It's like, give me that vibrant, that bright red. And we took it back. And sometimes, because Jane was joining the second season, whereas Michelle had done the first one, sometimes I'd come in the mornings if we hadn't fitted something, and I'd try it on. I'd be like, oh my God, Margaret would not be seen dead in this, I'm telling you right now. And Claire would be like, that's my skirt. So it became like a wonderful thing of like making sure that they were always in opposition, because that's how they defined themselves in a sense.
Did you draw that, by the way? It's amazing.
That's
amazing.
So
wonderful. Thank you. Any more questions? There we go. If we can, we got a couple of mic. Oh, there we go. Right there. If you can just pass the microphone to the behind you here, that lady. Yeah, go for it. What's your question?
I know you sort of touched on it a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to get a sense of what you saw in Olivia Colman really for The Crown, and then also how you're going to, or how you are finding her Philip. I mean, is she reading with other actors? Because clearly, that was such a key part of the first 2 seasons. You want to replicate it again? So.
I mean, with Olivia, now, the ages of the Phillips and, we're going to really pretty established actors now. And so you can't do that. Can you come in and mess around a bit, and can you read? And, these are all, really, people with, they've been working now for some time. They'll tell you to shut up and get stuffed if you go to them and say, would you come in and read with us? So you have to make offers. And so I think we all felt that Olivia had, something that corresponded. You know, that both, just that ability to be both plain and dazzling, and to be both knowable and unknowable, and there's a sort of every woman. There's something very connectable, and yet, you know, quite anonymous about Olivia. And so I think we all were excited about her. And then we rang her up and she said yes on the phone. And I mean, we don't even want to meet or anything. No, it's fantastic. I've just crashed my car. And it was weird because we rang her on the day that she had just watched it. Well, she'd just watched it with her, and apparently her husband had said, Claire Foy is so good. But she said yes on the spot, and so we're slightly normally it's a big old palaver, and you know, talk to the agent, talk to this person, and it was all very quick. It was one phone call, and now I've spent some time with her, and you know, it's exciting. But we're just starting the process, so I wish I had more to report.
We've got a microphone here, I believe. Hello, sir.
Hi. Oh, I don't think... Oh, it is on. Fantastic. Mainly a question for Peter, I think. So you obviously have a really good sense of what's coming up for the characters who you're writing about. Is there anything that you know is on the horizon that particularly intimidates you to write about, or that you're especially looking forward to tackling?
Well, I think you know, I have yet to enjoy the moment of feeling confident about anything, you know. So I think I just feel overwhelmed and nervous is a sort of default condition, and I stumble through life feeling overwhelmed and nervous. And I gather there are, you know, pills you can take that will change that. But then I might just sleep all day long, and I you know, that's how I feel about the show, and that's, but that I don't. The biggest challenge for me is all the time just sort of thinking of just misjudging it. You know, I think that it's such a. I think of the show as being, I describe it as a haemophiliac. And that if you touch it too hard in the wrong place, it'll bruise. And that by that I mean, you know, we're in such an area of responsibility where you're writing stuff where, so for example, Tony Blair in the years after the Queen, I read his autobiography, and his memory of his audience scene with the Queen was a transcript of the scene that we had done with Helen Mirren, and he wrote the autobiography afterwards. And you get then into a strange cycle of memory or not. And I, as a child, had made up. I mean, I don't mean this to get dark or anything, but that something had happened where I felt I'd been responsible for something, which of course I hadn't been. I was just a child, and I projected my own responsibility into that moment. But it's very like that. You know, if you start to make an act of the imagination about certain relationships, about certain moments in history, to offer an explanation as to why people came to a decision or why they did something, and you shortcut it because you have only got an hour in which to simplify something like the Suez, you know, conflict or something, right? I feel the responsibility of that, and whether I'm misjudging it, or whether I've oversimplified it, or whether my version, which I'm happy to offer, say, this is just me having a punt, everyone. I'm just guessing, gets taken too seriously, or you know, because once it's on a screen, it has a way of becoming its own history, and in the way that we all, when we have a conversation, if you then ask someone what was said in that conversation, their memory of that conversation is corrupted, and that memory gets passed on, and that memory gets passed on, and so soon you have a whole new history that I don't want to be part of creating bogus history. And so that part slightly spooks me.
I think we've got time for 2 questions, please. Can you pass the microphone just behind you, please, if that's all right? And there's a lady in the middle there as well, please. Can we get the microphone to the lady in the middle? Thanks. Hello, sir.
Yeah, my question is really about pitching it to Netflix. You know, you've made films for cinema and you made them for television. So what made this difference, and when did that process start, and what makes it so different? Because it fits so well, I think, on Netflix. And what was that relationship, and how did that work?
Well, I mean, we went and we did, we went like a bunch of, chancers. We went to LA, and we went to about 5 or 6 different meetings, and some of the meetings, just chemically in the room, they didn't feel as good as others, and the meeting in Netflix happened to just have a very positive energy. And I think that we went in at a time where they were just considering their own international expansion. We weren't aware of that. And I think it was, most of my life I've gone into rooms and told someone something that I'm really passionate about, and they've just looked at me like, could you have come in with anything else? I really want to do a story about a conversation between David Frost and Richard Nixon. People are like, and this felt, I actually, for once in my life, walked into a room and told a group of people something that was part of what they could use as part of their corporation's policy. It actually made sense to them. Oh, someone's coming in with a story that has international appeal at precisely the moment that we are expanding our operation internationally. And I think for them, The Crown is an important driver of their international subscription basis. And for me, reciprocally, it was like to do a show about something as traditional and old-fashioned as The Crown, and to remain incentivized and energized while doing it. It was exciting to have Netflix be the place to do it, because it was groundbreaking, and because I could then think, like I was saying to the gentleman earlier on, about when trying to work out how people are going to be watching this, what the rhythms of viewership are now, how are we consuming stuff, how are we processing it, how are we digesting it. And so it felt like very traditional subject matter, but in a very progressive medium that's right at the heart of where we're changing and how we're changing.
Thank you. And then a lady with a microphone.
When J.K. Rowling said she was going to write 7 books, she sort of had an idea at the end where she was going to go. You decided to do 6 series, 3 seasons. Do you know where you're going to end? The Queen being as the age she is and still going strong, and have you thought about? The
assumption being that she lives to 360.
360. So have you thought about that?
I, to be honest with you, I didn't think it'd be as tiring and as overwhelming as it is, and I can't think beyond just doing the 2 seasons that we've done right now. That we're doing at the moment. I really can't, actually. It's
as soon as Donald Trump walks into Buckingham Palace,
falls
to the ground.
Please, God, no.
The end.
The end.
I really don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I couldn't even imagine doing Diana. I can't even think like it's.
He's got a heist movie to write.
I've got a heist movie to write.
For me, for Vanessa. Thank you so much for your generosity and your time tonight. It's been absolutely lovely. Thank you guys for being here tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Really appreciate you being here. Could we have a round of applause for our wonderful filmmakers? Thank you.